Hello, Year 13. So today we are going to be focusing on the economic problems of 1918 to 39. Now that is a huge chunk, and this is going to be the focus over the next sort of couple of lessons. So we're going to break that down, and we're going to work on 1918 to 1930. So looking at the impact of the First World War on economics, the impact on staple industries and their decline. We'll then look at the general strike causes, events and impact, before finally looking at the Great Depression and why Britain wasn't quite as badly affected as other countries. As usual, if you can make sure you're filling in your booklets as you watch the slides and as you hear my voice, do pause the video when needed, but thank you for the tip. I will try and pause when I mention an act and explain it so you have got time to write it down. I hope you're coping well with all things remote learning, and any issues, please do let me know. Right, let's get. So the First World War was a total war, and to be able for this to be successful, it required huge economic effort, and as such, it did have a significant economic impact. This can be seen through the reduction in the value of exports for Britain, which were at 525 million in 1913, but by 1918 these were at 501 million. We also see that Britain has to recruit a far bigger workforce. This is because a number of men are off working for the armed forces. So over 5 million Britons served in the armed forces, and then with those individuals away fighting at war, that workforce then needs to be supplied and filled, and women fill that gap. So what we actually see is the industrial workforce only actually falls by 5%. And that is, I suppose, testament to the people who step up to work. So younger workers, women workers, and also older men who delay retirement to carry on working. We also see that demand for war supplies means that during the war there are huge demands for certain industries. So, for example, the Battle of the Somme in 1916 saw 1.5 million shells fired by huge guns. You might remember in 1915 we had the shell crisis as well. So we also see that there's other areas or products that are linked in with this that show that those manufacturing industries also develop. So whether it's cotton production, rubber, medical supplies, petrol, glass, new electrical goods, these are all being promoted because of the need of war. Now, in the immediate aftermath of war, what we see is a huge economic boom. Huge is probably a bit of an overstatement, but we see an economic boom. This is very much because people coming back from war are eager to get their jobs back. We also find that what's going on the continent is far greater damage. So if you think about what's happened in France and in Germany and in Belgium, there's been huge amounts of damage to infrastructure, to farmland. So those countries aren't able to deal with their economies as quickly. So, for example, in Germany, there was such internal unrest and economic depression that it meant that they were unable to be as economically ready after the First World War. What we also see is how Britain kind of gets going pretty quickly. So 17,000 new agricultural smallholdings are set up, and 11,000 new companies are set up in 1920 alone. The inflation of war had meant more money was there to be spent, and domestic demand was really quite high. So in 1919 to 1920, only 500,000 people were unemployed. So we do see that there is a real post-war boom. Now, when we think again at our exports, which also includes re-exports, by 1920, this is at 1,585 million, whereas this had been 637 million in 1913. Now, this all seems incredibly positive, but by 1921, it is really clear that the pre-war problems had not gone away and the post-war boom was not going to last. And this is where our longer-term impact of the war really comes in. Now, the root cause of these problems was a fall in world prices for primary products. Now, output had risen quite considerably in Britain during the war, so with 30% growth in arable acreage cultivated. And this trend can kind of be seen across other areas of industry as well. So output has increased, But that output doesn't naturally decrease after the war, and so prices really fall. You've got a surplus of products on the market. That means people make less profit. As a result of that, that means that people are unable to pay wages, or you actually see a real long sort of trickle outwards impact in multiple industries, as more people sort of end up basically becoming unemployed because the market is saturated with things that it doesn't need because there's not a demand for them. What we also find is that because there was a fall in world prices, it's not just affecting Britain, but it's affecting things far more widely across the world. So the coal industry in particular recovered very much in Germany and Poland, and this put even more coal on the market. That reduces demand, and it also reduces prices. In engineering and shipbuilding, huge wartime demands aren't able to be replicated in peacetime either. So what we find is that lots of industries are now suffering because the demand that they experienced during the war is no longer the same as it is after the war. Now, the war in the short term boosts the economy, but in the long term there are real problems building up. And really the greatest problem that is affected is that of staple industries, and that's what we're going to move on to now. So there are lots of problems with Britain's staple industries. There on your screen are a couple of examples of those staple industries, so steel, coal, textiles and shipbuilding. I'm sure you can remember many others as well. Now, foreign competition is probably our most serious problem facing the staple industries. Now, this is because you have other nations who are able to produce things far better than British industry. So if we think of Germany, so German technology, especially in chemical and steel manufacturing, totally outshines that of Britain. If we also think of the USA, their economic growth post-Civil War of 1861-65 was really impressive. And these industries developed with much greater innovation and mechanisation. I think this is probably our next thing of a reason for the problems of staple industries, is that Britain's staple industries refuse to be innovative. They really lack efficiency, and they needed to progress in the ways in which they were basically doing things. They're not particularly modernised, and there's a real traditional craft-based working practice. We also find that Britain's education system isn't producing the scientists, technicians and professional managers of some of its rivals in other countries. This family firm ethos is basically not enough to make sure that British staple industries can significantly develop. What we also find is that British currency is very firmly based on the gold standard. And this is what is widely used as international means of exchange. So what we find is that Britain's exports of these staple industry goods are expensive, whereas you've got others from other countries which are being able to be produced far more cheaply, maybe because their country isn't on the gold standard, or also because they are more innovative and far more mechanised in their process of production. So by 1929, there is a real slump in staple industries. So the slump of 1929 had a really big effect on British manufacturing imports. Coal was hit particularly hard, and we see a 66% fall in exports. We also see in iron that overall production declined. So whereas 10 million tonnes had been produced in 1913, only 6 million are produced in 1913. We talked about shipbuilding with the impact of World War One, and it was in a really bad state by 1929 because the fall in world trade as a result of the Wall Street crash just makes this whole situation so much worse. We also find that actually Britain's empire is able to start producing things far better and far cheaper cost. So, for example, India had taken 50% of cotton exports by 1913, but it only took 20% by 1929. So the re-export market to places like India was really not being used as much. Because these staple industries are facing less demand, what that naturally leads to is people being laid off work. So we then get high unemployment in really localised areas. I'm sure many of you remember the Jarrow Crusade, which we did last year. So here, the shipbuilding company was closed down, so Palmer Shipworks, Palmer's Yard Shipworks, something like that. And they went on this big march to London because the entirety of that town basically was unemployed. So we have really localised areas of unemployment and effect because of the reliance on staple industries. So, for example, Lancashire, where there are 2,000 different textile factories, the decline in textiles means that this rapid decline that happens there hits this county particularly badly. Now, these industries, with their reliance on the export market, but their lack of mechanisation and innovation mean that you have a large number of people who are dissatisfied, who are unemployed, and who are now struggling to make ends meet. And that very much leads us to the causes of the general strike. So in 1926, a general strike was called by the TUC, and it was initially to help support miners, but it was calling across all industries, all major industries, to strike to try and get action to be done to help the plight of this industry. Now, there are a number of key reasons for this strike. So, growth of trade unions and the use of industrial action, the actual problems within the mining industry itself, some key events leading to the strike as well. So if we think about the growth of trade unions and why that is significant, so membership of unions pre-war was about 4 million people. By 1920, this was at 8.4 million. So 60% of adult male workers were in trade unions. This was an unprecedented figure. And you had 3 trade unions giants. So the Amalgamated Engineering Union, Transport and General Workers Union, and the General and Municipal Workers Union. So the TUC is kind of your umbrella organisation for unions as well. Now, they were becoming far more influential, and what we see is increased radicalism in their actions. So, for example, we have in Scotland the Red Clydeside, so obviously the red referring to sort of communist tendencies, where Clyde Workers' Committee was formed to coordinate strike action. So we see a huge growth as well in syndicalism, so the belief that actually damaging property of factory owners, mine owners, etc., to get your point across. We also have the power of union action being seen in Red Clydeside, where they demanded a 40-hour week and opposed cuts to increased wages that had been brought in. The demonstrations that they had led to huge clashes with the police in Glasgow and arrests of strike leaders by the government. We also have railway strikes in 1919, and these were very much at the well, some of it was to do with wage reductions, but also because there was a dispute over loading arms for Russia in 1920 to fight against the revolution. So we also have a coal strike in 1920, which was supported by the railway unions, and it secured wage rises from the government, who still controlled the mines in that time. So we have way more industrial action. Because there is more industrial action, that makes it normalised. So because it's normalised, it means that this is seen as a tool in the arsenal of workers and trade unions, that quite often, if they strike, they get their way. Because they get their way, they are then able to make progress. They then strike again, okay? So what we see is real problems as well in the mining industry. So there is many issues that we sort of already sort of alleged to in the stable industry section within the mining industry. And this is particularly that by 1921, with the boom ending, the government doesn't want to keep subsidising mining with exports falling. So in 1921, mines are handed back to their owners and market forces come into play. Because you've got declining sales of coal and you've got falling profits, mine owners want to cut wages. As a result of this, what we find is that the miners threaten general strike on the 12th of April 1921. The strike then gets rescheduled for the 15th, and you actually find that the other triple alliances drop out, and the strike ends on the 1st of July 1921 when the miners run out of money. So the government agrees to a £10 million subsidy, but the owners still introduce substantial wage cuts of up to 50%. Now, it was very clear that the workers felt very let down in 1921. It was clear that with growing unemployment, loss of trade and declining production, that circumstances were very much moving against union action. So there are other key events that come into play here. So in 1924, there is a threat of a further strike. So there was going to be an increasement of hours and cutting wages of July 1925. Now, to avert this strike, Baldwin offers a temporary subsidy and another inquiry into the mining industry. Now, because of this, the strikers somewhat believe that if they continue to threaten to strike, the government will keep on handing out subsidies. Now, by March 1926, we also had the Samuel Commission's report coming through, and it basically recommends amalgamations, nationalisation, and modernisation. Now, these are very worthy ideas, but the basic recommendation was ending the subsidy and reducing wages once longer term reforms had been agreed. So owners reject these long term reforms, they don't see the point of introducing them. And when the subsidy ends, the miners basically become locked out of their works when they reject any wage cuts. So by the 1st of May, the TUC agree to a general strike. They see that nothing else can be done, but their desire is very much for compromise. We can also cite the Daily Mail incident where they refuse to publish an issue where the general strike should be described as a threat to British parliamentary democracy. So that kind of gives the hawks of the Conservative Party reason to cut off talks and for the strike to go ahead. Now, in knowing the causes of the strike, we also need to be thinking about, well, why did it ultimately fail? Now, the whole point of a general strike working is that you need to stop the country from running. And the biggest problem here is that the government was able to put in place volunteers who were able to basically fill in gaps. So you have incidences of, lawyers driving trains and teachers, doing rubbish collection for the day or working in a coal mine. So the country basically keeps on running. Troops protect food supplies, and there are 1,760 prosecutions. In Birmingham, the entire organisation committee of the strike was actually arrested to try and stop anything from happening. Now, the strikers didn't actually do a good job of communicating the strike and getting sympathy from the British public. Their newspaper, the British Worker, wasn't really in high circulation, whereas the government's newspaper, the British Gazette, was able to be communicated far more widely to a greater number of people, and they also used radio and the BBC to, the BBC said it was neutral in all of this, but it wouldn't let the TUC broadcast their ideas. We also have the problem that there's a real uncertainty from the TUC of their aim. So what is the point of this strike? Why are they striking? And the government, because it was so well organised and determined, presents this whole strike as a challenge to the constitution. So because the strikers and the TUC aren't presenting this unified image of what they want, yet the government is, and looking and showing that the TUC is threatening the constitution, it makes them look like the bad guys and means that they lacked support. And the TUC leaders actually have very little sympathy with wider political aims of some of the strikers, and they're more concerned with the funds of the TUC itself. Now, in the end, the ultimate challenge by the TUC ended with membership falling and the number of strikes being significantly reduced because people saw it as just not being particularly effective. So I suppose when you look at the impact of the strike, we could think about how in 1926 there were 162 million days lost to strike action, but by 1934 this was 960,000, so quite significant. Employers were still able to cut wages and discriminate against workers, but the very high costs for government and to employers in loss of production did encourage a new approach to employers and unions cooperating, because they didn't want these strikes to happen. So finally then, we need to be thinking about Britain and the Great Depression and why it wasn't hit quite so badly as elsewhere in the world. Now, I'm sure you're all very well aware that the US stock market, Wall Street, crashes in 1929, and this is the start of a prolonged period of economic downturn, which affects most countries of the world. Now, this leads to a decline in world trade, an increase in protective tariffs, and a huge rise in unemployment in developed countries. So poverty ends up existing quite significantly in many European countries. What we find, though, is Britain isn't actually that badly hit when compared to countries like Germany or the USA itself. But Britain was very dependent on trade, and as we've already mentioned so far today, staple industries were export-based. So the Great Depression, with its reduction in world trade and the increase of tariffs put up by other foreign countries, really affects British staple industries. So the manufacturing trade was particularly hit. So it was 30% lower in 1938 than it had been in 1929. And re-exports are also particularly hit with a 23% fall. We also see services suffer. So the British Finance Service suffered a decrease, and we also see the direction of British trade changing particularly. So the proportion of imports from and exports to the empire increased, and the proportion of trade with other countries decreased. So Britain becomes way more economically inward-looking and very dependent upon its empire. The most obvious effect of the Depression, though, was it intensified the problems of unemployment. Newer industries didn't depend on unskilled or semi-skilled labour, therefore they couldn't really absorb the unemployed from older staple industries. But why isn't Britain as badly affected as elsewhere? So what we find is actually the formation of the national government in 1931, and we could argue that some of the work that the national government does in mitigating the economic effects of the Depression does go some way into meaning that Britain isn't as badly affected. We also see that the changes in economic policy weren't particularly profound either. So the decision to abandon the gold standard didn't really lead to inflation or rapidly changing exchange rates as it might have in other countries. And what we find is actually it modifies the underlying system of liberal capitalism, and it means that the sort of results of the Great Depression are quite limited. The effects of the Depression were also reduced by the fact that there's a rise in imports, particularly from the empire, and a continued fall in prices. So for those in work, the cost of living falls, and so there's more cheap food available. So it means that you're not as badly hit. We've also got internal developments and improved living standard, so expansion of domestic house building. We looked at the Housing Acts in the last video. That meant that there is sort of this ribbon development around larger cities and suburbs. It's not nationwide, but housing expansion provides work and a demand for other goods and services. We also have low interest rates at this time, which allows relatively cheap borrowing to finance building and also allows home buyers to get mortgages. So other positive things which kind of help mitigate the problems of the Depression. We also find that there's a rise in these newer industries, which aren't so dependent upon the export market. So These really improve the quality of life as more people had motor cars, better transport, more vans and lorries on roads, and as such, this improves the transports of goods within the country. There's also a flourishing entertainment industry with cinemas and films with sound. So, because of that, we have new areas which are sort of cropping up and I suppose providing jobs and incomes for people. What we do find though is that the Depression did increase the divide between rich and poor. So, although it doesn't have the universal effect in some other countries, what we do find is that there is a real difference. So, areas which were particularly reliant on stable industries, like Jarrow with its shipbuilding yard, the majority of the population is unemployed. But other areas, say Coventry, where a large proportion of people are involved in the manufacturing of cars, is much less badly affected. We also see, though, that Britain's not particularly affected by political extremism, as Germany was at this time, um, and the economic effects of rearmament that happened in '38 also relieve these depressed areas and regions. And even though unemployment sort of remained quite high into 1940, rearmament does help to create jobs and mitigate the effects of the Depression. So overall, in comparison to other countries, it isn't as badly affected. Right, I hope all of that has made sense. I hope your booklets are well filled in. We will carry on next time with economic impacts after 1930, so looking at employment. We will look particularly at the Jarrow Crusade and the role of the national government. So some of the things that we've kind of touched on today will hopefully make a little bit more sense as well. Any questions, of course, please do let me know. Hope you have a wonderful weekend when it comes to it.